Welcome to the Elokus channel. This is class number 16 in the discourse Oteh Kasalma 5672, the second discourse in the Great Maayon B'Shasha Egdimu. So yesterday's class number 15, I felt was a little bit scattered. Try to tighten it up today, so get a little sharper. We're trying to explore the world of Atzilus and understanding the idea that Atzilus, the contradiction regarding Atzilus. On the one hand, we say that it is not new. It's a emanation. An emanation means something that existed already, but obviously not pronounced, not seen, not known in the source. And then it just emanates, which means it comes forth. And it becomes noticeable and recognizable and identifiable. As like a person's thoughts. They're inside a person's mind, they're hidden to the outside. And then when a person records, in this case, like I'm recording a teaching or a thought, or you write something down. So you're emanating something that's within you, emanating it outwards. It becomes more of a visible, tangible reality. But if we say about Atzilus that that's the case, means that the Ein Sof contains the elements of Atzilus. The Ein Sof, the infinite one. Beyond Atzilus is Ein Sof, pure Ein Sof. Or we might say Pshita Sa'or, the simplicity of the infinite light beyond Atzilus contains within itself the 10 spheres, Chachma, Bina, intelligence, emotion. It's just that you don't see it. It's so benign, it's so hidden. But that would mean if we say it's Giluy HaHelam, it's the revelation of the concealed. And there's another point to that. If that's the case, then when Hashem emanates Atzilus, we cannot say about Atzilus that Atzilus is utterly nothing to him, because if it once was part of the Ein Sof, it's part of the Ein Sof, it's part of the reality of the Ein Sof. That means that it is of significance to the Ein Sof. It's made up of the Ein Sof, or the Ein Sof contains these features. So it can't be that it's literally nothing to the Ein Sof. And that's where he's challenging it, and he's saying, well, we know about Atzilus. Number one, the notion to say about Atzilus that it's Giluy HaHelam, it's the revelation of the concealed, is challenged by the fact that we say regarding Chachma, and obviously all the other powers of Atzilus as well, that they are Yesh Me'ayin, V'Chachma Me'ayin Timatzeh. Chachma emerges something from nothing. So that challenges the idea that it pre-existed earlier. It pre-existed, because if we say it's Yesh Me'ayin, means it's totally new. And secondly, the fact that it says that Atzilus is Ein Aroich, it is utterly insignificant to the Ein Sof. If Atzilus would be a part of the Ein Sof, if we can trace all the sphirot and attributes and the features of Atzilus could be traced into their source, then it's not Ein Aroich. It's not meaningless. It very much is something, because the Ein Sof always contained these features inside of it, so it is of significance. Definitely can't say it's utterly not significant. So now he's explaining, and we do say that Atzilus is utterly insignificant, and he brings the verse that we say in davening, Ein aroich lecha ba'olam hazeh, that we can't compare you in this world. And the notion that he started explaining last year is, two years ago we started it already, that the valuelessness of Atzilus and everything that obviously comes after Atzilus, but even Atzilus, that's the point. Even the world of Atzilus, even the world of emanation, to the Ein Sof is a much greater valuelessness and insignificance than even the material physical world compared to Atzilus. Because the material, and he gives two reasons. This is where we want to gain a lot of clarity now. This is the point that I felt was a little loose yesterday, so let's clarify this. He explains there are two reasons why the lowest world compared to Atzilus has much more value than, although it's really also considered valueless, but still it has much more value than the nothingness of Atzilus, the value of Atzilus to the Or Ein Sof. And Atzilus to the Or Ein Sof has a much greater insignificance. It's much more nothing. Okay, it's always in Chassidus. It's really sometimes really something that makes me chuckle is that in the Chassidus the whole learning of Hasidus is trying to explain to you deeper levels of nothingness. How nothing we are, how insignificant, how meaningless, and then how meaningful we really are, and how powerful our actions and mitzvahs are, because God chooses to take an interest in this nothingness and allows us to express His somethingness. So there's always the two sides of the coin. First, we have to understand how nothing we are, and then we can appreciate how something we become when we do the right thing. But in any case, here we're going into the various levels of how nothing something can be. So the point that we made yesterday was as follows: that the first, and he brings two ideas of why it's not a good comparison, the comparison of this world to Atzilus, and therefore apply the same idea to Atzilus, to a higher world. Number one is as follows, is that there is a essential difference between Or Ein Sof and Atzilus. Or Ein Sof exists with a true existence. It doesn't receive its existence from anybody else. It exists. Its existence is absolute. In as much as the Or is obviously reflecting Atzmos, the essence, and God is without, he's not an existence that came into existence. He is with an absoluteness. Atzilus is a world, and a world means it came into existence from once not existing. So Atzilus is a world. Now, within the world itself, it's the highest world. As he refers to it, as we said earlier, Olam Elyon, it's the highest world. And then a whole chain of worlds flow from Atzilus, evolve rather from Atzilus until you get to the lowest physical world. And they're vastly different, but they share something very common. They're both worlds in the sense that they both don't have absolute existence. They're both of the same type of an existence that only exists circumstantially, because someone is investing in their existence. And if that someone who's investing in their existence pulls out, they are both obliterated totally. Comes out that Atzilus and Asiya share something very, very, very much in common. They both don't have real existence. They exist only because God is existing them into existence. So therefore, the difference between Atzilus to the Or Ein Sof, Atzilus, understand, is a world of divinity. But the difference between that world of divinity to Hashem, to God Himself, is an absolute, infinite separation. It is incomparable completely. But Atzilus and this world, our world that we live in, notwithstanding the vastness of the difference, as he refers to it in the Maamor, Atzilus is much more chashuv. It's much more of a quality world, far greater world. Everything in Atzilus is so much fancier and schmancier than this world on all levels. However, I'm gonna call it the embarrassment. It shares a fundamental fault, a fundamental deficiency, is that it doesn't even exist. It only exists because of some other power above it bringing it into existence. So, in that sense, we are so much more in common with Atzilus than Atzilus and us have in common with God Himself, with the Or Ein Sof. So that's point number one. Then point number two is that he's explaining that the concept of dependency. And that is, when one thing is dependent on something else, then it is canceled to that which it is dependent on. So, when you understand something, the more dependent you are on something, the more canceled you are. I talk about the worry now. We're talking about elections and politicians, and all that is constantly coming up in the news. So, the more dependent, and you expect your elected officials to govern by what's correct and what's right. But we all know they're not going to do that. Why they're not going to do that? Because they have a bunch of lobbies. In other words, since they are dependent for their power, for the monies that they get, and therefore those who give them the money, since without the money, the companies or wherever they are, the people that back them, without them they would be a nobody. So they are very much held held enslaved, so to speak, to the wills and the whims of whoever is empowering them. So you see how when one thing is dependent to the other, it is canceled towards that thing that it is dependent on. Right? So the question is how dependent, what's the level of dependency? So it's interesting. All worlds are obviously dependent in God, because without God, we'd have no existence at all. God gives beingness and existence to the world. And that is equal in Atzilus and Asiya. As we said earlier, if God pulls out of Atzilus and if he pulls out of Asiya, of our world, we would be utterly and completely obliterated. As it says in Tanya, not only wouldn't we be, we would be so erased to the point that we would have historically never existed. In other words, it would be undone even our past existence. Not to get into that right now, to ponder that, but that's really cool. To that degree, we would not exist without Hashem's influence into our existence. Fine. Now the question is, how much is the world of Asiya, our physical world, dependent on Atzilus? There's also a dependency. Because Atzilus, the content of our world is all content downloaded to us from Atzilus. Every entity that there is down here, the content is already formulated in Atzilus. It's just that it comes down first in the spiritual world to become spiritual creatures and beings. Like for example, in the world of Bria and in the world of Yetzirah, there are powerful beings of kindness, loving angels filled with love. And then there are a whole lot of angels that are filled with judgment and severity. They're very strict angels, fiery angels. That's because in Atzilus there is Chesed and there is Gevura. So as that translate, and that over there they're divine features, but then when they translate into the world of Bria, they become created beings of love and of Gevura and of strength. And so on, all the other features. And then when it translates into this physical world, like we spoke yesterday, it becomes water and fire. Two elements. The world is made up of water and fire, the four elements, and one of the two. Right? So this is the water and the fire, two powerful elements. That's Chesed and Gevura translating into this world. So if Atzilus stops delivering its Chesed, downloading its Chesed down into this world, and or it would stop, or both, and would stop downloading its Gevura, its power, its severity into this world, then we can understand that all water would disappear, would dry up, or would cease to exist, and all fire would cease to exist. The whole energy would be canceled. It just wouldn't exist. There wouldn't be such a thing as fire and water in the earth. Cold and heat, it wouldn't exist. Fine. So we're also dependent. So in that sense, we might say, just like all worlds are dependent on God, so too the lower worlds are dependent on the higher world. So in this level, it kind of would be equal to say that the lower world is insignificant to the higher world in the same way that all worlds are insignificant to God. But he makes two very important distinctions, and why, in the second point, he makes two important distinctions of why it's not the same. Because the level of dependency. The dependence of our world, the dependence the dependence of the world, of all worlds, on God, is that God holds the key to our existence. He is supporting us with existence, and he is the real source for that support. Meaning, it's not like he's the middleman and just passing something on. He is the source of that support, and we have nowhere else to go to for existence other than him. But Atzilus, although Atzilus is downloading content to us for us to exist, Atzilus is receiving that content from a higher place. It's not that Atzilus is the real boss. Atzilus has nothing on its own. It's a world. So it's like, in business, there are certain middlemen that you are kind of dependent on because they bring you customers, or they bring you companies that buy your product, and so on and so forth. But hypothetically, if you can find a way to bypass them, you can move past them because it's not them that you're after. If you can manage to make a direct connection to the company itself, to the buyer itself, and not have to have then goodbye with the middleman. So you're dependent. Of course, you're going to send, Hanukkah gift or holiday gifts or whatever it is to the middleman, to the person, or to the teller in the bank. But you really, it's not that important, because if you have a good connection to the CEO of the bank, to the real boss, And that's really what it is with Atzilus. Atzilus is not really transmitting anything to the lower world of its own. It is receiving everything from Hashem, from God, from the Ein Sof. And therefore, our reliance on Atzilus is very secondary in comparison to the reliance and dependency that all worlds are to Hashem himself. Hashem is giving, God himself is the source. He's not receiving it from any higher up. That's number one. Number two, what would happen if the influence is canceled? So let's see. If God himself stops his influence into the world, we discussed already earlier, all of existence would become absolute naught and nothing instantly, to the point that it just wouldn't be. We would just not be. However, because creation, as he's going to explain in a few minutes, we're going to read it inside, creation is something utterly original. It's something from nothing. And when we say creation, we mean even Atzilus creation. Even Chesed, Gevur, these are all original ideas. So if God stops originating them from his absolute capable, what we might say, Hashem's creativity. He's enormously creative, and he can truly bring forth new things that have no existence at all before he creates them. And therefore, they're completely dependent on his creativity to bring them forth. Which means before God creates them, they don't even exist as an idea. They don't even exist as a concept. However, Atzilus gives life to the lower worlds. It gives kindness and all these things to the lower worlds. It downloads its content to the lower worlds. And if it would pull back its download and it wouldn't, let's say the powers of kindness would not flow, so what would happen? It's not like the water would essentially disappear. It's that water would stop being tangible physical water. Water would go up to a more spiritual state. In other words, if Atzilus pulls the flow, not just from Asiya, but Atzilus pulls the flow of its input, of its influence, all the way up into itself, into the world of Atzilus, then it also wouldn't disappear. What would happen? Then the angels of kindness and the angels of love and the angels they would all disappear. But where would their energy go? Their energy would be consumed or subsumed in their source, where it would continue to be kindness. Because Atzilus itself has kindness in it. It just would be on a much higher level. Instead of it being tangible water, instead of it being an angel of love, it would be God's attribute of kindness. So it's not like it would be obliterated completely. It just would not exist in its current state. However, if God pulls out of Atzilus, the kindness would disappear utterly. That means there wouldn't even be a concept of kindness, because Hashem does not have, the Ein Sof doesn't have kindness and severity and all these spheros as part of him. They're not included in him. As he brings from Pasach Eliyahu, Lav Mikol Inun Midois Ihu Klal. Translated, it's a phrase from the Zohar. God is not of any of these midot, of any of these emotions. He doesn't have any of them. He doesn't even have a source of them, a trace of them in him. He completely originates them. And as a result of that, the dependency of all worlds to Hashem is absolute. Because without him, we don't exist at all. But the dependency of the lower worlds to the higher worlds, even if they were to remove their influence, we would not cease completely to be. We would just be more spiritual, more godly, more higher in a higher state, absorbed in him. Which, by the way, itself means that not just from our end, but from his end, that we're to a certain degree important to Atzilus, because we are, the content of Atzilus is just projected in a very constricted, limited way when it comes down into this physical world, but we are a reflection of Atzilus. So if we are a reflection of it, of him, of the spheres of Atzilus, so you can't say that to him we are absolutely nothing, because we're a reflection of him. Right? So if we are nothing in essence, then whatever he is, God forbid, also nothing. So there is significance to our existence. So this is basic idea that he's explaining here. Now we're going to read it inside and see how how he says it over here. I'm going to reread a little bit over here. And even though the higher world is also mashpia into the lower worlds, if not for the influence from the higher world, then the lower world would become cancelled. As we spoke earlier, so we have to understand there's a major distinction. This, that the higher worlds influence into the lower worlds. Number one, it's not like the Atzilus has its kindness, and that really belongs to Atzilus, that Atzilus really owns it. It is the source of kindness. It's not that way. Atzilus doesn't have anything on its own. It's only acting as a middleman. It's only from the chayus, from the life force that he receives from its creator, from its higher up. That's number one. Number two. And it's true, he says. True. If not for the influence from the higher worlds, the lower worlds would become nullified. Aval, and that's a given. So in that sense, we say that there is a lot of dependency on the lower world and the higher world. But bear in mind, he says, they would not become nullified completely. That they should be as if they're not. But rather, what would it mean that he is mevatel them? That the rays of Atzilus are not being emanated out, but going back into their source. And then the rays would be part of the source. What does that mean? The concept of their bittul, of their nullification, if there wouldn't be an influence, God forbid, from the higher world, what would be then? Then the lower worlds would just curl up and become included in the higher world. And it is known, which means that everything that there is in this world, sand and stones and trees and insects and birds and fish and everything, planets and galaxies and humans and everything, every single, to the tiniest detail, every single flower, every single vegetable, everything. As he says, amazing. Everything really exists in Atzilus. Atzilus has everything that's in this world exists in a abstract, infinitely incomprehensible state to us of how these things exist in Atzilus, but everything is there. It is known. Everything that is created in the lower worlds, nimtza kolol, is already included, but Olam Elyon, it's like in the artist's mind, the entire art is there. It's just they had a picture in their mind, and then it's just a matter of going from their mind onto a canvas and becoming art on the. So Atzilus has within it the entire picture of this world. Nimtza kol ba'olam elyon. It's all there in the higher world. Kenoida, as it is known. The chol chelkei doimim tzameach chaim medaber, that all the parts of the inanimate, and the vegetation, and the animal, and the human, dibiyah of the three lower worlds, Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, Yesh Gam Ba'atzilus, also exist in the world of Atzilus. As stated in Eitz Chaim, there's a beautiful Maayon from the Rebbe Marash called Mika Moichan. Over there, he goes through a bunch of different creatures, and he shows you how these creatures exist in the higher world. He shows you, he goes through how they exist upon level. Every creature talks about a lion, and he shows you what the lion is in this world and where the lion is in the higher world. We know there's a lion in the chariot, and how there's a lion in Atzilus. Then he talks about a rooster, and he goes and he shows you how the rooster exists in all worlds, how ultimately it's bina of Atzilus is called a rooster. Anoisein lasech vi bina. Amazing discussion over there, how everything we see in our world has its spiritual roots. Explain it elsewhere. So if Hashem would not channel it down, download it down, then it would all remain in its source above. And the reason why Atzilus possesses all of these features, because it's already a world, it's already a thing. And because it's already a thing, okay, obviously a very edel thing, but it's still already a thing. In the thing of Atzilus, it contains all things that are going to come forward. It comes out that their bittul, that means their nullification. If their cancellation, if they would be cancelled. It's not that they would cease to exist, but rather they would have an elevation. They would all be elevated to a higher place. But not an utter non-existence, an utter cancellation. But you can't say this principle. You can't say on Atzilus to higher than Atzilus. You can't say that Atzilus is included in the Or Ein Sof. That all the features on Atzilus, they really begin already higher. They're in the Or Ein Sof, but they're hidden in the Or Ein Sof. Why? Because on the Or Ein Sof we say, Lav Mikol Inon Midos Klal. It's not of any of these emotions at all, any of these midos, any of these measurements. And therefore, and if God forbid the influence would depart mimenu, from him, to Atzilus, the entire Atzilus, and consequently all worlds coming from Atzilus, would become voided out completely, and it would become as if they never was. That's how much. No, not like they would exist in a subtler state, and not even that they had a history, like we said earlier, as if they never existed. And now we can understand and appreciate why the higher world is completely ein aroch, completely insignificant, more than the insignificance of the lower world to the higher world. Why? Because a pirish ein aroch, what does it mean, ein aroch? Which means insignificant or incomparable. When we say an erech, a value, we're learning actually these laws in Rambam now about value. So erech is when you do the value, you can say the value of 1 to 100 is more than the value of 1 to 1,000. Okay, if I have $1 and I meet up with someone who has $100, so my $1 has more significance to the one who only has 100. But if I meet someone who has $1,000, it's less significant because he's got 1,000. I only have $1. If I meet someone with $1 million, then my dollar is even more insignificant. And if I meet someone with $1 billion, my dollar shrinks and becomes so tiny. However, you can't say it's utterly non-significant, because the $1 billion is made up of $1 billion. That means the dollar has to be significant, because if the dollar is zero, absolutely zero, then the billion would be 1 billion zeros, and he would also have nothing. So it has value, it's just less value. That's called erech. Erech means you can estimate and compare how much. Like it says in Tanya. It's a part of it. It's a tiny part. But then, if you were to measure up the number 1 to infinity, there the Alter Rebbe says, there it doesn't have any value. Because infinity is not made up of a bunch of single dollars. Infinity is to infinity, to the infinite, the 1 is 0, and the billion is also 0. It's all meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless. So it's spiritually, if we take this concept out of its physical meaning and apply it to the spiritual, is the concept of a cause and effect, where things evolve one from the other. Like, for example, we spoke earlier, Atzilus and the worlds that evolve, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, that come forth from the world of Atzilus. In the process of evolution, the thing that evolves from the higher source, from the cause, the effect that comes from the cause, has some value to the cause as well. It's like a little part of it. Now, I want to stop over here because it's the half an hour, and it also needs some clarification to understand the next part. Be'ezus Hashem, tune in to the next class. Meanwhile, let Mashiach be here today.